The chance meeting the crystal chandeliers of the Fairmont Hotel ballroom sparkled like captured starlight, casting dancing shadows across hundreds of elegantly dressed guests. Alina Monroe stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, champagne glass in hand, watching the San Francisco Bay shimmer in the distance. She had never been comfortable at these high-society events. But as the lead architect for the New Horizons Foundation, attending their annual charity gala was part of her job. She tugged slightly at the deep blue silk dress her friend Rebecca had insisted she wear. The fabric felt foreign against her skin, too soft, too expensive, too much like she was pretending to be someone she was not. Alina preferred her work clothes, practical blazers, and comfortable shoes. Tools of a profession built on precision and purpose rather than pretense. "You look like you're planning an escape." "Root," a warm voice said beside. Her dote Alina turned to find a tall man with kind hazel eyes and slightly tousled dark hair that suggested he cared as little about formal grooming as she did about fancy dresses. He wore his tuxedo with an ease that came from obligation rather than enjoyment. His bow tie slightly crooked in a way that made him seem more human than the polished executives surrounding them. "Is it that obvious?" Alina replied, allowing herself a genuine smile. "Only to someone doing the exact same thing," he said, extending his hand. "James Blackwood. I run a boring tech company that somehow makes enough money to justify my presence at events like this." Alina Monroe. "I design buildings that will probably outlast both of us." She shook his hand, surprised by the warmth of his grip and the calluses on his palms that suggested he did more than push papers. "An architect," James said, his eyes lighting with genuine interest. "Now that's actually impressive. I just write code and convince investors to give me money." They talked for hours, long after the formal program ended and most guests had filtered out into the night. Alina learned that James had built his company from nothing, that he had lost his sister 3 years ago to cancer, and that he now raised her teenage son, Thomas, alone. He learned that Alina had grown up in foster care, that she had put herself through architecture school working 3 jobs, and that she believed buildings could heal communities. What she did not tell him was the other truth, the one that sat heavy in her chest like a stone, the truth about the tumor they had found when she was 28, about the emergency surgery that saved her life but stole her future, the truth that she could never carry a child, never experience pregnancy, never give a partner the family most people dreamed of having. Building connections 3 weeks after the gala, Alina stood in the conference room of her firm, presenting designs for the Bayside Community Housing Project. The room was full of board members and investors, but her eyes kept finding James Blackwood, who sat in the back row, leaning forward with intense focus. "The goal isn't just to create affordable housing," Alina explained, pointing to the 3-dimensional model on the screen. "It's to build a community, shared gardens on the rooftop, a central courtyard for gatherings, ground floor spaces for local businesses, architecture that brings people together rather than isolates them." After the presentation, James approached her with a smile that made her heart skip in a way she had tried to prevent. "That was brilliant," he said simply. "When can we start building?" "You're serious?" Alina asked, surprised. The project needed significant funding, and most investors wanted guaranteed returns, not community dreams. "Completely serious. I've been looking for a project like this for years. Something that actually matters." He paused, then added with a slightly nervous smile, "Also, I was wondering if you might want to grab dinner sometime. To discuss the project, of course." Alina knew she should say no. She had learned over the years to keep people at a distance, to protect herself from the inevitable moment when someone would want more than she could give. But something about James made her want to take the risk. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. The growing ache over the following months, Alina and James became inseparable. They met for coffee to discuss project details that could have been covered in emails. They took long walks along the waterfront, talking about everything from childhood dreams to fears about the future. He made her laugh with terrible jokes and impressed her with his genuine care for people, but far less than he did. One Saturday afternoon, James invited Alina to his home in Pacific Heights, a beautiful Victorian house that somehow felt warm despite its size. she met Thomas, a quiet 16-year-old with his mother's dark curls and his uncle's thoughtful eyes. "Uncle James says, you're going to build homes for people who need them," Thomas said as they sat in the kitchen. Alina helping to prepare dinner while James claimed to supervise, but mostly just stole vegetables from the cutting board. "That's the plan," Alina replied, smiling at the teenager's earnest expression. "My mom always wanted to do something like that," Thomas said softly. "She used to say that everyone deserves a place where they feel safe." Alina watched James's face tighten slightly at the mention of his sister. Saw the way he reached out to squeeze Thomas's shoulder with gentle reassurance. The love between them was palpable, built not from biology, but from choice, from showing up day after day, from the 1,000 small acts of care that create a family. That night, as she drove home through the quiet streets, Alina felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She was falling in love with James Blackwood, and with every passing day, the secret she carried grew heavier. She knew she had to tell him. She knew that he deserved to know before things went any further. But she also knew that the moment she told him would likely be the moment she lost him. The weight of silence. Rebecca found Alina in her office late one evening, staring at blueprints without really seeing them. "You need to tell him," Rebecca said gently, setting a cup of tea on the desk. "I know," Alina whispered. "He cares about you. Anyone can see that, which is exactly why I have to tell him now, before it goes any further." Before he's in too deep, Alina's voice cracked slightly. "Most men want children of their own, Rebecca. Biological children. And I can't give him that. You don't know what he wants until you ask him. I know what everyone wants. I've had this conversation before, remember? With David, he said he understood, said it didn't matter, until it did." Rebecca pulled up a chair beside her friend. "James is not David. David was a selfish child who couldn't see past his own expectations. James has raised his nephew for 3 years. He knows what it means to build a family through love. That's different. Thomas is his blood. His sister's son? Family isn't about blood, Alina. You of all people should know that." Alina did know that. She had learned it in the foster homes that took her in the social workers who fought for her, in the teachers who believed in her dreams. But knowing something in your head and believing it in your heart were two different things entirely. That night, Alina made a decision. Tomorrow, she would tell James everything. She would lay her truth bare and let him decide if what they had was worth building on an imperfect foundation. And if he walked away, at least she would have been honest. She just hoped her heart would survive the conversation. The project that binds morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the construction site trailer as Alina spread the latest architectural drawings across the table. James stood beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with coffee, close enough that her hands trembled slightly as she pointed out the revised plans for the community center. "We've added more natural light here," she explained, tracing the lines with her finger. "Studies show that sunlight significantly improves mental health, especially for children who've experienced trauma." James studied the drawings with the same intensity he brought to everything. "You're thinking about the families who'll live here, not just the buildings." "Buildings are never just buildings," Alina said softly. "They're where life happens. Where children take their first steps, where families gather for dinner, where people feel safe enough to dream again." He looked at her then with an expression that made her breath catch. "That's why you became an architect, isn't it? Because you understand what it means to need a safe place." Alina nodded, not trusting her voice. This was her opening, the moment to tell him everything. But before she could speak, James's phone buzzed urgently. "I'm sorry, it's Thomas's school," he said, frowning at the screen. "I need to take this." Alina watched as his expression shifted from concern to determination during the brief conversation. When he hung up, he ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Thomas got into a fight. They're suspending him for 3 days." James looked exhausted suddenly, the weight of single parenthood evident in the lines around his eyes. "He's been struggling lately. The anniversary of his mom's death is next week, and he won't talk about it," Alina said immediately. "Family comes first. We can finish this later." James hesitated at the trailer door. "Would you want to come over for dinner tonight?" Thomas likes you, and maybe having someone else there would help him open up. Every instinct told Alina to decline, to maintain the distance she needed to protect herself. But the hope in James's eyes, the vulnerability of asking for help, made it impossible to refuse. "I'll bring dessert," she said. Cracks in the foundation that evening. Alina sat at James's kitchen table with Thomas, helping him with algebra homework while James cooked pasta in the background. The teenager was quiet, his usual spark dimmed by whatever had happened at school. "Want to talk about it?" Alina asked gently, not pushing. Thomas shrugged, then after a long pause said, "Some kid said I was lucky to have money now, like that makes up for losing my mom. Like Uncle James buying me stuff is the same as having her here." Alina set down her pencil and met his eyes. "Nothing makes up for that loss. Nothing ever will. And anyone who thinks money can replace love is an idiot." A ghost of a smile crossed Thomas's face. "Uncle James says I shouldn't call people idiots. Then he's a better person than I am," Alina replied, making Thomas laugh for real this time. Over dinner, the conversation flowed more icily. Thomas talked about joining the robotics club at school. James shared a funny story about a disastrous investor meeting, and Alina found herself relaxing into the warmth of their small family unit, feeling both incredibly happy and terrified at the same time. After Thomas went upstairs to finish homework, Alina helped James clean the kitchen. They worked in comfortable silence, passing dishes and utensils in a rhythm that felt practiced despite its newness. "Thank you for coming tonight," James said as he dried the last plate. "You have a gift with him. He doesn't open up to many people. It's a good kid. You've done an amazing job raising him." James leaned against the counter, studying her with those observant eyes that saw too much. "Can I ask you something?" Alina's heart began to race. "Of course. Every time we get close to something real, something deeper, you pull back. Like right now, you're already planning how to leave." He said it gently, without accusation, just honest observation. "Have I done something wrong?" "No," Alina said quickly, her chest tightening. "You've done everything right. That's the problem I don't understand." This was it. The moment she had been dreading and avoiding. Alina set down the dish towel and forced herself to meet his gaze. "James, there's something I need to tell you. Something important." Her voice shook, despite her efforts to steady it. "But not here, not now. Can we meet tomorrow? Somewhere we can talk privately?" Concern flickered across his face, but he nodded. "Tomorrow." "My office? After work?" Alina agreed, then made her excuses and left before she could lose her nerve entirely. As she drove home through the dark streets, she rehearsed what she would say, how she would explain the medical history, the impossible choice she faced every time someone got close. She would tell him the truth, and then she would let him go. It was the only fair thing to do. The confession James's office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building. All glass walls and modern furniture that somehow still felt welcoming. Alina arrived exactly on time. Her hands clenched around the strap of her purse like a lifeline. He greeted her with coffee and a nervous smile, leading her to the comfortable seating area away from his desk. They sat facing each other, and Alina noticed he looked as anxious as she felt. "Before you say anything," James started, "I want you to know that whatever it is, we can work through it. I care about you, Alina, more than I've cared about anyone since my sister died." His words were meant to comfort, but they only made this harder. Alina took a deep breath and forced herself to begin. "When I was 28, I started having severe abdominal pain. I ignored it for months because I was working 3 jobs and didn't have time to be sick." She paused, the memories still sharp despite the years. "By the time I finally went to the hospital, they found a tumor, a large one." James's expression shifted to concern, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "They had to do emergency surgery. The tumor was benign, but the damage was extensive. They removed my uterus, my ovaries, everything." Alina's voice dropped too barely above a whisper. "I can't have children, James. I can never be pregnant, never carry a baby, never give you a biological family." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Alina watched James's face, waiting for the inevitable change. The moment when caring shifted to pity or disappointment.
8.
3 years ago, James said slowly, I was building my company, working 80-hour weeks, convinced that success meant everything. Then my sister called and told me she had stage 4 cancer. 6 months, they said. She made it 8. Lena listened, confused about where he was going. Before she died, she asked me to take care of Thomas. Not just financially, but really raise him. Be his parent. James's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I was terrified. I didn't know anything about being a father. I'd barely spent time with kids. But I said yes because I loved her and because Thomas needed someone. He leaned forward, taking Elena's hands in his. Those first months were the hardest of my life. Thomas was grieving, angry, lost. I made every mistake possible. Forgot parent-teacher conferences, burned dinner every night, had no idea how to talk to a teenager about loss. James's grip tightened slightly. But somewhere in that chaos, something amazing happened. We became a family. Not because of biology, but because we chose each other. Every single day, we choose to show up and try again. Lena felt tears streaming down her face as understanding began to dawn. So when you tell me you can't have biological children, James continued, his voice rough with emotion, all I hear is that you've already survived something incredibly difficult, that you're stronger than you give yourself credit for, and that if we decide to build a family together, we'll do it the same way I built mine with Thomas, through love, choice, and showing up. But don't you want children of your own? Alina asked, her voice breaking. Biological children who look like you? James smiled, and in that smile was more certainty than Alina had ever seen. I have a child of my own. Thomas is mine in every way that matters. And if we want more children, Alina, there are thousands of kids in foster care who need families. Kids like you once were. Kids who need someone to choose them. He brushed a tear from her cheek. That's how we build our family, if you'll have us. Alina couldn't speak. The words she had expected, the rejection she had prepared for, never came. Instead, James was offering her something she had never dared to imagine: acceptance, understanding, and a future built not on what she lacked, but on what they could create together. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you'll give us a chance. Say you'll stop running from something that could be beautiful just because it looks different than what you expected. Breaking down the walls, Alina sat in stunned silence. James's hand still holding hers, his words echoing through every broken place inside her. For 5 years, she had carried her diagnosis like a punishment, a deficiency that made her less than whole. Every relationship had ended the same way, with sad smiles and gentle explanations that while they cared for her, they wanted biological children, wanted to pass on their genes, wanted the traditional family experience. She had learned to expect rejection. She had built walls so high that even she couldn't see over them anymore. But James was not asking her to be someone different. He was asking her to be exactly who she was. I'm scared, Alina admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've done this before, James. I've told someone I cared about. I've watched them say they understood, and then slowly watched them realize they couldn't accept it. I don't think I could survive that with you. James moved closer, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. I can't promise we won't face challenges. Every relationship does. But I can promise that this, your medical history, is not something I need to accept or overcome. It's just part of your story, Alina, and your story is what made you the person I'm falling in love with. The words hit her like a wave. You're falling in love with me? I fell in love with you the night of the gala. You talked about buildings, healing communities with so much passion that you forgot to be nervous. I fell deeper when I watched you with Thomas, treating him like a person instead of a tragedy. And I fell completely when I realized you were pulling away not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much to let me make a choice you didn't think I understood. Alina let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. I've been trying so hard not to fall in love with you. How's that working out? James asked, with a gentle smile. Terribly, she admitted, finally allowing herself to smile through her tears. Absolutely terribly. Building something new over the next weeks? Something shifted in Alina. The weight she had carried for so long began to lift. Not disappearing entirely, but becoming manageable, shared. James never treated her diagnosis as something that needed to be fixed or mourned. Instead, he talked about their future with an excitement that included possibilities she had never considered. One evening, as they walked along the waterfront after a long day at the construction site, James brought up the subject that had been quietly growing between them. "I've been thinking about what you said. About kids in foster care needing families," he began. "I want to look into becoming foster parents. Not someday, not in the distant future, but soon. Once the housing project is complete. Once we're settled." Lena stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "You're serious, completely serious. Thomas is almost 17. In a year, he'll be off to college. This house that felt too big when I first got it will be empty again." James took both her hands. "I don't want an empty house, Alina. I want noise and chaos and homework battles and family dinners. I want to give kids the kind of home you deserved when you were growing up." The tears came again, but this time they were different. Not tears of grief or fear, but of hope. "I would love that," Alina said. "I would love that more than anything." 6 months later, the Bayside Community Housing Project stood complete against the San Francisco skyline. Its modern lines softened by the green spaces Alina had insisted on including. The grand opening celebration filled the central courtyard with music, laughter, and the sounds of children playing in the new playground. Alina stood with Rebecca, watching families move through their new homes with expressions of wonder and relief. "You did it," Rebecca said, squeezing her friend's arm. "You built something that matters." "You did it," Alina corrected, nodding toward James, who was helping an elderly resident carry boxes up the stairs, despite the formal suit he wore for the ceremony. "None of this would have happened without him." Rebecca smiled knowingly. "I'm not talking about the building, Alina. I'm talking about you. You let someone in, you stopped running." Before Alina could respond, Thomas appeared at her elbow, now a confident 17-year-old, preparing for college applications. "Uncle James wants you," he said. "He's acting weird." "Well, weirder than usual." Alina found James standing on the rooftop garden, the entire city spread out before them in the golden light of late afternoon. He looked nervous, his hands in his pockets, his usually confident demeanor replaced with something more vulnerable. Alina asked, concerned. James pulled a small box from his pocket, and Elena's breath caught. "I had this whole speech planned," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple platinum band with a single diamond. "But standing here in this place you created to give people hope, all I can think is that I want to spend the rest of my life building things with you. Not just buildings, but a family, a home, a future." He took her hand, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Alina Monroe, you are the strongest, most compassionate person I've ever known. You survived things that would have broken other people. Instead of becoming bitter, you became someone who builds homes for strangers. You loved my nephew like your own before I even asked. And you've taught me that family isn't about biology or tradition. It's about choosing each other every single day." Tears streamed down Elena's face as James knelt on one knee. "Will you marry me? Will you build this life with me?" "Yes," Alina said, the word coming out as half laugh, half sob. "Yes, absolutely yes." As James slipped the ring onto her finger, the rooftop door burst open and Thomas appeared with Rebecca, both grinning widely. "Finally," Thomas said. "Do you know how hard it's been keeping this secret?" They celebrated on the rooftop as the sun set over the bay, the four of them already feeling like the beginning of something bigger. 3 months later, Lena and James stood in the offices of the Department of Child and Family Services, fingers intertwined, facing the social worker who would determine their future as foster parents. "Your home study came back excellent," the woman said, reviewing their file. "You have the space, the stability, the support system. There's just one more thing I need to clarify." Lena tensed, old fears rising, despite James's reassuring squeeze of her hand. "You've indicated you're interested in older children. Siblings who've been separated, medically complex cases." The social worker looked up with something like respect in her eyes. "Most first-time foster parents request infants or toddlers. Can you tell me why you're different?" James and Alina exchanged a glance, and Alina found her voice, because those are the children who need families most. The ones people overlook because they come with complications, with histories, with needs that require patience and commitment. She paused, thinking of her own childhood. I was one of those children once. Someone chose to take a chance on me, and it changed my life. We want to do the same. The social worker smiled and stamped their file with approval. 2 weeks later, Alina and James received a call about 2 siblings. A 9-year-old girl named Ruby and her 7-year-old brother Felix, who had been in the system for 3 years. They had been moved between homes, always together, but never finding a permanent placement because Ruby had diabetes and Felix had severe anxiety that manifested in selective mutism. They're considered hard to place, the social worker explained. Ruby needs constant monitoring of her blood sugar, and Felix hasn't spoken to anyone outside his sister in over a year. Are you sure you want to meet them? We're sure, Alina said, without hesitation. The first meeting took place in a neutral office, sterile and uncomfortable. Ruby sat protectively beside her brother, her dark eyes suspicious and guarded. Felix stayed hidden behind her, his small hands clutching a worn stuffed elephant. Alina knelt down to their level, not crowding them, just offering a gentle smile. Hi, I'm Alina. And this is James. We know you've met a lot of adults who made promises they didn't keep. So I'm only going to promise you one thing today. She paused, making sure Ruby was listening. Whatever happens, wherever you go, you two stay together. That's not negotiable. Okay? Ruby's expression flickered with surprise, then cautious hope. Together? Always together, James confirmed, his voice gentle. That's what family means. Felix peeked out from behind his sister, his eyes meeting Elena's for just a moment before darting away. But in that moment, Alina saw the same fear she had once carried. The fear of hoping for something permanent and having it taken away, coming home 3 months of visits. Overnight stays and careful relationship building led to the day Ruby and Felix moved into their forever home. Alina had prepared their rooms carefully, asking Ruby about her favorite colors and learning from Felix's previous social worker that he loved outer space. When they walked through the door for the first time as a family, Felix immediately noticed the glow-in-the-dark stars Alina had placed on his ceiling and actually smiled. Ruby tried to maintain her tough exterior, but Alina caught her running her hand along the bookshelf filled with new books, touching each spine like a treasure. That night, after dinner and homework and bedtime stories, Alina stood in the doorway of Ruby's room as James tucked her in. This is real, right? Ruby whispered, her voice small and scared. You're not going to change your mind? James sat on the edge of her bed. This is real. You're home now, Ruby. Both of you.